welcome to Learning Music with Pat. Last week we started talking about the science of music and the science of sound, and I didn't quite finish it, but one of the things we learned was atoms and molecules and their importance in transferring sound. An atom is the basic building block of nature. It has the protons, it has the electrons, and atoms join together to form molecules. Molecules may be large or small. They may be just a congregation of a few atoms together, or as many as 15 or 16,000 atoms together. But the molecules transform the sound, and without molecules there would be no sound. You could be sitting beside some kind of a bomb that's set to explode, and it explodes. Miraculously you're not hurt, but you don't hear it if there are no molecules, because it is up to the molecules to actually transfer the sound. So I thought what I would do today is just tell you a few more things about atoms and molecules that I find interesting, so you'll have a better understanding of it. And then when we're finished, we will go off to something else. Now, you can feel loud sounds on your skin. There's all kinds of ways you can feel sound. However, it is the ear and the eardrum that actually catch most of the sound waves done by molecules, so you're able to hear. But there are a lot of other little interesting facts. So what I want to do is just show you. This is an empty quart jar. It holds 32 fluid ounces. It will hold a quart. Now, it seems as if there's nothing in it. No water, no liquid, no nothing, just air. But if you look at this chart that I have here, and I'm going to be looking at my own notes, what does this jar contain? Well, it contains 4.9 sextillion oxygen molecules, and there we have it here, 4.9 sextillion oxygen molecules, 7.7 quintillion carbon dioxide molecules. Notice all the zeros, 7 quintillion carbon dioxide molecules, and 18 sextillion nitrogen molecules. These molecules are so small, when you push your hand in the air and you feel the air, you're actually feeling the molecules compress, but you don't even see it. You could get something like 4 million molecules, and it wouldn't take any more than an inch on a ruler. They're very tiny, and the atoms that compose them are very tiny. If you had, say the atom has the protons, the neutrons, and the electrons, if you took the nucleus of an atom, the center part of it, they're usually drawn in a circle, and it has a positive charge, and you increase the size to a period, like the period at the end of a sentence, all you have to do is have that one period, which is very large for a molecule. The nearest electron is going to be 30 yards away. And what's in that 30 yards? Empty space. There's a lot of empty space, but everything is contained in the atom and in the molecule, but they hit up. If you blow up a balloon and the balloon is a certain size, the molecules are traveling at about 1,500 feet per second. You blow up the balloon and the molecules are in motion and they're hitting each other thousands of times per second, and they scrape against the wall of the balloon, and that's what holds the balloons out, is the fact that they're scraping up the sides of it as they move back and forth. It gets to be fairly complicated. A couple of other things that I thought you just might be interested in knowing, and I'm going to be using my notes for these. You have to have sensation in your life, or you're not going to function as a normal person. So just for example, some of the things that happen in sound, Indians used to put their ear to the ground because they could hear the pounding hoofbeats of horses coming, so they would know whether an enemy was coming. They couldn't hear the sounds in the air, but they could hear the sounds if they put their ear to the ground. And the reason for this is that sound travels faster and better in solids than it does in air. And that's the reason that soundboards work. We can relate this to music. A piano has a large piece of wood in it, and it's called the sounding board. All of the strings are connected to the sounding board. When they are plucked, then the sounding board vibrates, and it actually increases the nature of the sound. For a guitar or a violin, the box of the instrument is going to act as a sounding board. For woodwinds, it's going to be the instruments themselves that act as a sounding board. So you do get more magnification of sound if you have something solid for it to go through. So let me just look at a couple of other things here that I want to tell you. When you put a shell to your ear, it's always said if you put a shell to your ear that you will be able to hear the sounds of the ocean. Well, you're not hearing the sounds of the ocean. I can remember when I was a child, I used to say, how do you get sounds of an ocean when you're not even in the beach? But what you're hearing is blood rushing through your ear, and the actual shell is acting like a soundboard, amplifying the sound of the blood going through your ear, so you're hearing a reflection of that sound. So there are a lot of interesting things that have to do with sound. If you're going to blow into a bottle and you get a tone, like a flute sound if you blow across a Coke bottle or something, what's actually happening is the molecules are going down into the bottle and back up the bottle, and that's how you get the sound. The speed of sound is approximately 1,100 miles per second, but the way that it travels through the air is approximately 1,500 feet per second. And when you have a lightning storm, you hear the sound after you see the lightning by several seconds, because light travels faster than sound, like 186,000 feet per second for light. Sound is much less than that, 1,500 feet per second. You can actually count. You see the lightning, you start counting by seconds, 1, 2, 3, 4. Then you hear the sound of the thunder, then you know that the lightning is actually 4,000 feet away from you. You can time the distance between the lightning and the thunder and find out how far the lightning is from you, so therefore how far the storm is from you. So there are a lot of things that we can understand about and learn about sound just by learning the science. Now, it's very, very important to have sound in your life. You have to have sensation. You can't be a normal person without sensation. We touch, we hear, we see, we taste. We have the sensations, seeing, hearing, touch, taste, and sound. And those sensations are important, and the only way we can be a normal person is to experience them. Now, unfortunately, some people are deaf, or they're blind, or they don't have the cognitive skills to be able to understand what they're seeing or hearing, and some people that I've worked with have intellectual difficulties, plus they are deaf. Now, I used to teach, and I was a music teacher, in a residential setting where people with intellectual difficulties went for treatment. And some of these children would be long-term residents. They would never get out. Others were being trained to be able to get out and live on their own. What was interesting with this is that I love the way they taught the kids. The kids, if they could go to a classroom and learn, they were encouraged to do so. And everything they learned was based upon a gas station. We had a whole setup with an actual gas station inside one of the rooms. Now, it wasn't as large as a regular station, but it was quite large. And they could go in with their little toy cars, and they learned everything they needed to know on the outside by learning about the gas station. They loved cars. They were crazy about cars. They couldn't wait to get out in the world and drive their own car. But they had to learn the skills of mathematics and reading reading and so forth, and it was all taught on the basis of a gas station. For example, math. If you drive up to your gas station and you want 2 gallons of gas, and each gallon costs 25 cents, how much does it cost you for 2 gallons of gas? Now you got to remember, these children have intellectual problems, and so everything had to be done on a very simple basis. For reading, what is the sign? Does it say stop or does it say slow? What are these lights? If it's green, what does it mean? If it's yellow, what does it mean? If it's red, what does it mean? But it's all in the context of driving, all in the context of getting gas. And it was just something that the children loved, and they did learn, and they very excitedly went to their classes. Now, what I did was I taught them to experience music. I couldn't teach them music. They would never understand the difference between a whole note, a half note, a quarter note, or anything like that. But I could help them to experience music. And so what I would do is I would go into their classrooms for half an hour at a time, as often as I could, at least once a week, sometimes more. And what I would do is I would bring rhythm instruments. Now, I do have some rhythm instruments with me. This is a rhythm instrument, and because since they couldn't learn to play an instrument, they could learn to shake something that made sound, and they liked that. I have a couple of others that I'm going to play. This almost looks like a person. What a sound. What about this? Like a little clapper. Now, there are eggs that you can get that you can shake. I don't have any with me. So, and also, I don't want to forget the tambourine. Now, by the way, as an aside, you don't just pick up a tambourine and shake it and consider yourself knowing how to play it. There's a right way and a wrong way to play a tambourine. And I had a friend of mine actually that gave lessons on how to play the tambourine correctly. Most people just pick them up and shake them and they think they can do it. But there are certain rhythms you can learn and certain beats you can learn, and when you play the beats and when you shake it and when you don't. So it actually has a science behind it, and you can learn to do it correctly. But what I used to do, I used to walk into the classroom with a record player. There were no CDs in those days. I used to use a record player, and I used to crank up the sound in a classroom setting, pass out these rhythm instruments, and they would play to their heart's content as I played various types of music for them. Now, there were children who could not go into a classroom situation because they had enough intellectual difficulties that they would gain nothing from a classroom situation. For them, I would go into the wards and into their rooms, and I would bring the record player. And some of them who couldn't hear, I felt so sorry for them because they couldn't hear. And so what I used to do with them is I used to crank up the sound, get a group of chairs around a card table with the record player, get it up as loud as I could, put their little hands on the record player, and they could feel the vibrations, and they loved it. If they couldn't hear sounds, if they were deaf and they couldn't hear sounds, they could sense the vibrations, they could feel the vibrations, and the louder the music, the more they could feel. And they were transfixed. They would sit there and they'd stare at me and they'd stare at the recorder, and when it stopped, they would point. They wanted me to start it again, so I would start it again. I wish that they would do this several times a day for these children, because without sensation, what do you have? You have nothing. Years ago, there used to be an experiment that they did with children, young babies. They did it for a while, and then they cut it out, thank heavens for that. But they would take babies, and they would give them custodial care. They would bathe them, they would feed them, they would change them, and that was it. No picking them up, no talking to them, no playing with them, no cuddling them. It was just straight institutional care, just enough to keep them alive. And they wanted to see how children would fare if they didn't have a lot of exchange with people. There wasn't a lot of contact with people, and they didn't have a lot of sensations. They didn't have anything to play with. There were no rattles. There was nothing that would make sound. And what actually happened is these children developed a condition called marasmus. And marasmus was a depression. They were listless, they couldn't grow, they couldn't learn, they were depressed, they laid there, and eventually some of them even died because of the lack of interchange between them and other people. So the experiment was stopped, and I can't imagine why they even did it to begin with. It doesn't make any sense that you would leave a child in a crib with nothing. It makes no sense to me at all. But the condition was marasmus, and what these children needed was sensation. They needed to feel, they needed touch, they needed to hear, they needed to play, they needed stimulation. If you don't have stimulation in your life, you lack, you can't develop, you can't grow. Now, there were also some experiments done with college students, because I think college students were paid well for it, so they did it to get the extra money. And no amount of money was enough, I think, for the kind of experiment they did. But they did sensory deprivation experiments in which they would be put in a chamber, not able to see anything, not able to hear anything, not able to sense anything or to touch anything, not able to smell anything. All of the senses were cut off. They were in a chamber, they were floated, they were wrapped up, and their eyes were blacked out, no light coming in, and it was like being totally alone with no sensation. And they kept them in for 2 or 3 days, 3 or 4 days, whatever was tolerable, to see how the body would react to no sensation. And what happened is that after 2 or 3 days, they had to stop the experiment and bring the students back out. Because with no sensation at all, the brain started to create its own sensation. They would start having hallucinations. Auditory hallucinations in which you hear something that's not there, visual hallucinations in which you hear something that's not there. That's typical of psychosis, but normal people, under certain circumstances, if they're not getting the stimulation they need, will have those kinds of experiences. So when they started seeing things and hearing things that weren't there and reacting to that, the experiment was stopped and they were pulled out and gradually integrated back into normal life again. And they knew that about 2 or 3 days is the limit. So what happens basically is that you can't tolerate not having sensation, not having sound or vision or anything. You can't tolerate it. The body cannot tolerate it. And it puts you into like a psychotic state where your brain creates its own sensation. But it's not normal sensation. You might have dragons chasing you or just really odd things happening that you are experiencing, and it feels very real, but it's not there. So the brain has to have normal sensation in order to be in contact with the world. And that's what happens, so you have to have that sensation. I wonder, there's an experiment going on now preparing astronauts to go to Mars, and they're all in a chamber. And they can see, they can hear, they have their senses, but they're not going to be able to get out of the chamber for about 1.5 years. And they have to create their own food, learn to relate with each other, solve their own problems. They're not in contact with anybody on the outside. Although they're being carefully monitored by scientists on the outside, they have personally no contact with them. And 1.5 years of that, I'm not sure that I could take it, but I'm not sure how well they will do. The problem with outer space is the great amount of nothingness that's there. And no seeing, no hearing, outer space, blackness, nothing. I know when I was teaching students psychology, I used to ask them the question, is there such a thing as nothing? And they used to discuss that for an hour and a half, and they could come to no conclusion. My conclusion would be there has to be something, because God created it. He didn't create nothing. He created the universe, but there are things in the universe. So how could there be nothing? But it was an interesting thing to discuss, to try to understand how important sensation is to our lives. This is why we need music. This is why we need the arts, why we need theater. Because without sensation, without stimulation, our brains can't function normally. We require it. It's like the more you use your brain, the more brain power you are going to retain. The more you're going to be able to fight against dementia or other kinds of conditions that people have. So it's important to keep up sensation. It's important to have music, arts, drama, everything. It's important to take advantage of everything that you can. And I think important to understand the science of music. How do we get to hear? What are we actually hearing? How is sound actually formed? It's a fascinating study, something that I've studied for a long time because I love science, but it also relates to the here and now. It relates to your instruments. It relates to how they work and where the vibration comes and where it goes. Let me just to show you and go back to the instrument so we get back to the music. The fipple mouthpiece, this is where the vibration starts as you blow in it. And then the molecules compress and they go down the tube, and that's where you get your sound. And the longer the tube, the lower the sound. We've already discussed that the sounds are different according to the size of the instrument, according to the structure of the instrument, according to the shape of the mouthpiece, the size of the mouthpiece, the kind of material that the instrument is made of. If I take my little alto, same kind of instrument, same kind of plastic, same kind of fipple mouthpiece, but it's larger, and the sound, of course, is different. Well, I think this is probably a good stopping point. I was going to do some more, but I'll wait. And next time we're going to go into how you can write music in different ways and get the same thing. I've mentioned it before, how you can write it differently, but it sounds exactly the same. So we'll delve into that next time. Please join me then.